Well, having talked about the relation between base and superstructure, now we shall try to understand the problem of the relation between base and superstructure. Marx points out that these two aspects, means base and superstructure, are not symmetrical. Symmetrical means balanced. Therefore, they do not form equal relationships. They are asymmetrical. And in order to explain this problem, Eagleton takes the literary example of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Must be knowing this is one of the very famous works by T.S. Eliot. And with the help of this example, Eagleton shows the general Marxist interpretation of the poem. So he says it may be argued that the poem is directly determined by ideological and economic factors. And this interpretation does not take into account the many levels that mediate between the text itself and the capitalist economy. Because Eliot had a very ambiguous relationship with English society. Because he was an aristocratic American writer. He belonged to an aristocratic family from America, and his relationship with English society is very ambiguous. Therefore, it is very difficult to interpret different labels that mediate between the text and the capitalist economy. And Eliot himself had declared that he was a conservative traditionalist. He has committed a conservative traditionalist rather than he was actually than a bourgeois commercialist. And here Eliot does not use. I'm sorry for that. Something is missing over here. But you must be knowing that he himself had declared that he was a conservative traditionalist. Therefore, it becomes difficult for the interpretation of the Westland, the different labels that mediate between the text itself and the capitalist economy. So he talks about these asymmetrical relationships. Further, Eagleton talks about the relation of literature to ideology. He defines ideology as the way men live out their roles in class society. Ideology is the way men live, the values that they follow, the traditions, the culture that they follow, they belong to, or they claim as their identity, the religion. So, the way men live out their roles in class society can be considered as ideology. And this ideology binds up people to their social function through values, ideas, and images. And these values, ideas, and images prevent them from true knowledge of society. That's what Eagleton thinks. Now, when we talk about the Westland in this sense, the Westland is ideological as it shows man making sense, experience which are false, okay, experiences which are false and prevent people from true social knowledge. That's what Eagleton thinks about the Westland. Means ideologies bind people to their social function through social values, ideas, and images, and they prevent them from true knowledge of society. And Westland is ideological in this sense. It shows man making sense, experience, which are false, he says, and it prevents people from true knowledge, social knowledge. But the relation of literature to ideology is not simple and direct, as we understood. It is very complex. So Eagleton mentions two extreme views about this relation. Firstly, all literature is nothing but the expression of ideology. And secondly, literature transcends ideology. These are two extreme views you can see. Firstly, says all literature is the expression of ideology. It is nothing else. And secondly, he says literature transcends ideology and shows relation that ideology hides. It goes beyond ideology. These are two extreme views, rather, two opposite views. He rejects both these views. He mentions actually these are not his views. He rejects both views, and for better understanding, he cites Karl Marxist theory, Louis Althusser. According to him, ideology and literature both represent in imaginary ways in which man experiences the real world. Althusser thinks that ideology and literature both represent in imaginary ways in which man experiences the real world. For example, our values, ideas, and images are not real as such, they are imaginary ways. And through these imaginary ways, we experience the real world. And same in the case of literature. Literature also represent world in an imaginary way in which man experiences the real world. So literature is essentially a part of ideology. That's what he thinks. In conclusion of this chapter, Eagleton makes it clear that Marxist criticism has not paid attention to artistic form or formal feature of literature. It does not focus on the artistic form. It talks about the social aspects, economic aspects, political aspects, but it does not focus on the formal features of literature, the form, artistic form. Marx himself believed that literature should reveal a unity of form and content. He criticized the extreme use of stylish techniques, but he did not completely deny the form of literature. Karl Marx, I'm talking about. For example, Greek classical art had achieved the unity of form and content. You know it very well. It is the unity. It is a very fine example of the unity of form and content. So we can say that Marxist criticism sees a dialectical relation between form and content. And of course, there is a relation between form and content, but it eventually or ultimately believes in the primacy of content. Content is primary, not form. So Eagleton states that this Marxist view of dialectical relations between form and content rejects the formalist view of art, and even it rejects vulgar Marxism as well. Now, what is vulgar Marxism? Don't take the meaning of the word vulgar by literal meaning. It refers to the Marxism which looks at everything from the perspective of economic base. That is called vulgar Marxism. Means looking at everything from economic point of view, economic infrastructure. Means this view, wherein dialectical relation between form and content is accepted. This view itself shows that it is not on either on the form of formalism on the side of formalism or in the extreme Marxism as well. It does not look at everything from the perspective of the economic infrastructure. So, vulgar Marxism has considered that the relation between the economic superstructure and the ideological superstructure was unique or casual one, and it looks at everything from economic determinism. It's everything in this world is determined by economic factors. That is vulgar Marxism, and Marxist criticism is not something like vulgar Marxism. Marxist criticism is not a single unified critical approach, according to Eagleton. Rather, it is a collection of various methods of literary artistic analysis. And Marxist critics have taken different positions in their analysis of literature. But what is the central idea in this analysis is that literature is a product of historical, social, and economic structure, not simply of economic structure. It is the product of historical, social, and economic structures. Therefore, it is not like vulgar Marxism in that way, because it does not simply rely on economic determinism. So, in this manner, we understand literature and history in the context of Marxism and literary criticism.